mug this morning with our school board candidates, Miranda Turner and Mary Cadera. Just so you all know, we will be recording today's meeting and it will be uploaded to our YouTube for folks who maybe missed the meeting and want to check it out, or for folks who would like to rewatch the meeting. So thank you guys all so much again for being with us this morning. We are here with school board candidates Miranda Turner and Mary Cadera. And there are so many people joining still, so I'll go ahead and give folks another minute to join. And then we can start off and hear from our candidates. And I will go ahead and pin them to the screen. Okay, perfect. So we will go ahead and start out this morning. Again, we are joined by school board candidates Mary Cadera and Miranda Turner. And we'll start out the meeting today by going ahead and letting them give us some introductions to themselves, the issues that they care about in this race, and then we will move into a question and answer section with them. So for those of us in the audience who have some questions, you can feel free to drop them in the chat. And when we get to the question and answer section, I will go ahead and ask them. And for introductions, we'll go ahead and start out with Mary. So thank you so much, Mary, if you would like to speak.
Thank you so much, Izzy. And good morning, everyone. Thank you for the chance to talk about this year's school board race and to introduce myself as a candidate. I've spent my career working in education, and serving on the school board has been a long-time interest of mine. I stepped forward to run this year for two reasons. First, I believe that there are a set of extraordinary challenges facing public education in Arlington and across the country. We are really at a tipping point. And second, I feel like the past few years have highlighted for all of us that our democracy depends on having well-informed citizens who understand and value things like truth and data and science and the Constitution. I believe that a strong public education system prepares kids to be full participants in our democracy and to thrive in their own adult lives. So for me, as someone committed to the cause of public education, the time to serve is now. I've talked to current and past school board members, and I know this job is a big commitment requiring many hours and much effort over each four-year term. What do I foresee over the next 4 years for APS? First, there's the urgent and immediate challenge of how to reopen our schools as fully, safely, and quickly as possible for all students who are able and ready to return. The past year has placed extraordinary burdens on students, their families, and teachers. Many of our students have lost ground academically, and mental health issues have been on the rise. Many live in families experiencing economic instability, food insecurity, and more. APS needs a comprehensive plan to support all students as they return and recover. Based on my experience in education, that's work I know how to do. But in addition to the immediate return to school challenge, APS and the school board must solve a set of longer term challenges over the next 4 years. And there are four that I'd like to talk about briefly right now. First, I'm really concerned that we have an unsustainable budget with a gap that's projected to grow to more than $100 million over the next 3 years. I believe there are changes that we can make to the budget process that will yield better results, and there are cost savings we can achieve if we follow the example of other school systems, some of whom are saving tens of millions of dollars in specific expenditures. Second, and related to the budget, we aren't taking care of our staff, many of whom have been pushed to the limit this year. APS teachers have not had a full salary increase in more than a decade. Arlington now lags behind other local school systems at many points on the pay scale. And I'm really concerned that we're doing this even as we know nationally that the pipeline of new teachers is shrinking, and it's going to get increasingly competitive in hiring. Third, we have to get a handle on our enrollment and capacity issues. We've had unprecedented growth, 38% increase in students over the past decade. And even with recent construction and expansion projects, APS will still have a shortage of seats for students across all grade levels in the next few years. The good news is that we have good options at our disposal to address those issues if school and county leaders will work closely together. A joint public facilities master plan is a really key piece of this work that was postponed during the pandemic that we need to carry forward. Fourth, and closest to my heart, We have to make changes to our system so it works for every child. Like other school systems across the country, there are long-standing inequities across race and class lines that the pandemic laid bare. In our schools, it affects who can read and who can't, who gets identified as gifted or disabled and who doesn't, who gets suspended or referred to law enforcement, and which families APS listens to. In my work, I've been so excited to see how many states and school districts are using the pandemic as an opportunity not just to reopen their schools, but to reimagine them, as Joe Biden says, to build back better. I know we can do this in Arlington as well, and I know it because for more than 25 years, I've worked in K-12 education. I began my career as a high school teacher in Virginia's public schools. Later, I joined PBS in the early days of the internet to create online programs for teachers and students, working my way up to lead PBS's National Education Division. I left PBS when my first child was born, and since then, I've been working with a number of local and national education nonprofits to help them improve their organizations, to analyze and advocate for good education policy, and launch and improve programs for educators and students. So now I want to bring what I know to serve my local community as a member of the Arlington School Board. Does a school board member have to have a deep background in education? Not as an absolute requirement, but it sure helps. I may not have every answer, but because of my experience, I definitely know where to look and who to ask. I know how to use my knowledge to fact check assumptions, to critically examine the data and ensure that we have the right policies and practices in place. So if you believe that we need school board members who know education deeply and can navigate the many immediate and long-term challenges ahead, I hope I'll have your vote.
Thank you so much, Mary. And now we will hear from Miranda Turner.
Morning, everyone. I'm Miranda Turner, one of the two candidates for the Democratic endorsement for school board, and it's good to be here with everyone this morning. A quick intro on me. I'm a lawyer with 3 kids, and I live in Green Valley. I'm a lifelong Democrat. I never really thought I'd be seeking elected office, but count me among the folks who's been inspired in recent years to jump in. I've had kids in APS since 2015, so I've followed and cared about school issues for years, but the issue for me this year, prompting me to go forward and jump in, is return to schools. And some of you know I've been involved in this advocacy since last year. For me, this meant asking APS to get our youngest and most in need learners back in the buildings, which APS didn't do for months, even though the governor's guidance said we should. It meant asking APS to implement safety precautions that we were planning for and which are working right now to keep everyone safe. It means right now asking to prioritize our younger learners for more days of in-person instruction this school year. Our teachers are vaccinated, and this is the most direct way to get back lost learning time and to start recovering. I don't think we should be giving up on this school year, and I think the school board should take an active lead on some of these issues. I start with all of this because the school board currently is facing the most important issue of our lifetime: how to deliver a quality education in a pandemic, at the end of a pandemic, and after a pandemic. As a candidate, I think it's important to talk about how I would have handled it if I were already on the school board. Right now, there are questions about why we can't add more days for students who want them. There are questions about what this means for the fall, if we can't fit more students or overcome logistical challenges, even though we still have months left on the school calendar. Return to school as an issue, unfortunately, isn't going to be over as soon as we would like, and I think the school board should ask questions right now on these issues and follow up every time so that we make sure we're heading in the right direction. And there are going to be other big issues to contend with: enrollment, facilities, budget. Enrollment's not going to rebound in exactly the way APS anticipates by the fall, but we are going to be a 30,000 student school district, and we need to plan for that using any breathing room that this year will give us. We're going to have to build up, and we're going to have to manage yet more boundary moves. And the budget drives this. How do we support a strong APS with the resources we have? Are we getting value out of our administrative overhead? Are we paying our teachers what they deserve? And do the schools need more support from the county, financially or otherwise? All of this has to be approached through an equity lens, in particular to identify barriers to student success and work to remove those barriers. So what's the role of the school board in all this? The school board provides oversight for APS. That means things like vetting assumptions, evaluating alternatives, challenging conclusions, asking questions, and following up. We need more of that from the school board in order to have a strong school system. It also sometimes means digging into the weeds, making sure the staff are getting it right, engaging and listening to all corners of the community, including those who may not step forward as readily. Board members are also the elected body for the school system, and are accountable directly to the community. The school board won't make all corners of the community happy all the time, but it should respond directly and transparently to concerns, explain what APS is doing and why, and what we are not doing and why not. Fundamentally, the school board should be looking out for those who APS is built to serve, our students, and making sure APS carries out its basic purpose to provide an excellent and equitable education for all Arlington children. I'm here to talk with you this morning, and I will be asking for your vote to serve in that role. Thank you.
Thank you so much to both of you for those great introductions. We will now be moving into the question and answer section. So we have folks already sending some questions in the chat. And for this section, I'm just going to alternate between who gives the first answer. So this first one will begin with Miranda and then Mary. And the first question for you both will be, if you were on the school board today, what is the first question you'd ask Dr. Duran about at a school board meeting?
The first question I would ask if I were on the school board right now is, why can we not get more kids back in schools for more days now that our teachers are vaccinated, which is a state we prioritize, now that we are seeing our neighbors in Fairfax and other localities doing it, and now that we see that our safety precautions that we planned for so many months and that are being implemented so diligently by our students and by our staff are working well. There is very limited spread in schools. There are low cases in schools, and we have children who want to go back for more days. We're clearing our wait lists. That's a very good thing. I think that should be a high priority, but there are empty classrooms and there is room for more kids to get back in the school building for more days, more time with their teachers. And I think that we should be moving in that direction right now. So I would ask Dr. Duran, why can we not move towards that this spring? And what, if anything, can the school board do in order to help you move that forward?
Thank you so much. And the same question for you, Mary. If you were on the school board today, what is the first question you'd ask Dr. Duran at a school board meeting?
Like my opponent, I would be asking questions about return to school because I know that this is so top of mind for every family and every student in Arlington. My question would be slightly different though, and mine would be that the school board is set to approve a budget in early May for next school year. And I would want to know, do we have the resources in place that we will need to fully and safely reopen our schools for 5-day in-person instruction options in the fall? Can you walk me through those things in the budget so that I can see them? And then do we have adequate resources to support a robust virtual option for our students who need to stay at home in August? And again, can you walk me through those things in the budget so that we make sure we are not caught by surprise in the middle of the summer when we are gearing up for August?
Thank you so much. And the next question will begin with you, Mary, and then Miranda. What do you believe to be the most significant issues or challenges in APS relating to students with disabilities and those with support needs? And what will you do to support these students in the way that they need?
All right, I think I'm going first, that's right?
Correct, yes, Mary.
Right. Okay, just checking. I would, the question about supporting students with disabilities is critical, and especially now because we know that many of our students with disabilities who've been out of the normal school operation for the past year, the services identified for them in IEPs and 504 plans in many cases haven't been able to be fully executed just because of the constraints over the past year. So the immediate question would be, how are we going to identify gaps in service that students have been entitled to in IEPs and 504 plans? And what's the plan for compensatory services to support them to get back to the level of functioning, the level of functioning in the school community and the level of support that they need? Longer term, as I read the program evaluation for students with disabilities, what I would be looking for as a school board member would be policies and practices that we can put in place to implement a more consistent level of service across all our schools. There's the challenge that depending on the school that you're in and your ability as a parent to advocate, how your child gets identified, what kinds of services they're entitled to, how you partner with the school in evaluating IEPs and 504 plans, that differs widely across our school, all of our school communities. So I'd push for greater consistency there. And then I think the other thing that is so important is that part of the plan, the 5-year plan for students with disabilities in APS, is a move towards greater inclusion of our students with disabilities in general ed classrooms. And to get to a place of greater inclusion, I think that we need more consistent implementation guidance for inclusion. Like, what are the best practices in inclusion? What does that look like? We need time for general ed and special ed teachers to plan together. And we need for all of the staff in the building to have a sense of shared responsibility for that model. That's not a special education thing that happens over here. The success of inclusion depends upon everybody in the school really linking arms and making sure that that it's working well for all students.
Thank you so much. And Miranda, same question for you. What do you believe to be the most significant issues or challenges in APS relating to students with disabilities and support needs, and what will you do to support them?
Sure. I think as Mary started, it's got to go right now and forward looking. And so right now, the biggest issue is that our students need to get back in the buildings, and they need to start having some of these needed services provided in person to the extent that that's something those families and those students can accommodate and choose to do. Schools do provide a number of really important services to some of our students, OT, speech, things of that nature. Currently, a lot of that is still being provided virtually, and OT virtually does not work as well. And so I think that we should start moving right now towards getting those kids back in, getting them back in for more days. I understand that at the option of the families, you can request and are often accommodated now for 4 days. And I think that's a good thing. It's important to start compensatory services and recovering that lost time as soon as we can. Going forward, I think we've got to look at, for the fall, if we're moving away from concurrent, which I understand we are in terms of the fall, how are we going to provide inclusion for those students with disabilities who do need to stay virtual? And how are we going to define and execute inclusion in a virtual environment? And then in the farther term, the longer term future, we've got to look at consistency across schools and making sure that our schools on a school level basis are hitting the mark in terms of the 80% of the time is the benchmark, looking at best practices and making sure that our students with disabilities are included as much as possible in the basic education that they are entitled to and should be provided by APS.
Thank you so much, Miranda. Moving on to the next question, which Miranda will answer first. This is another equity related question. So in this week's RL Now, Simone Walker published a compelling piece on the ways APS has not made progress in closing the gap for Black students and Latinos and special education students. Have you seen it? Do you agree? And what will you do to find solutions to close this gap if elected to the school board?
So I live in Green Valley, and I am a white parent of white children. So I have not seen it personally myself, but I've been here since the time that the Montessori program was co-located with Drew. And I remember the Green Valley Civic Association going to FOIA the data from APS and publicizing it about how the Drew traditional program and the Montessori program were not achieving similar outcomes for their students of color in particular. And the Drew neighborhood program was not, providing a similar level of academic outcome for those students. And there was a big push here, and I was very supportive of that. I think it's incredibly important. So in that sense, yes, I have seen that. I think it's an issue that we are all aware of. And if we're not, we should become aware of it and we should address it going forward. I also think that it's going to be potentially a more significant issue. There was a gap and there may be a wider gap going forward. And that is in part due to the pandemic. And it's something that now everyone is focused on and hopefully we'll be working to close. And that's a really good thing. It's something that existed before, but maybe this is the opportunity now that everyone is focused on lost learning time after the pandemic to take a look at things that existed before and address those in addition to addressing these more recent problems that we have seen over the past year. So as a school board member, I think the most direct way to look at the gap is from a quantitative perspective, to get data, to have that data be consistent, and to publish it so that the school system and the school board are accountable for making sure that we are seeing improvement over time.
Thank you. And Mary, same question to you regarding Simone Walker's Oral Now piece. Have you
Yeah.
seen? Okay.
Yeah, I read that piece yesterday, and Simone is right on the mark. She is on the money with everything she is saying about, and this is a data thing, as Miranda mentioned, this is about data, but it's also about listening to the lived experiences of people in the community. And what we have known even before the pandemic is that there were serious inequities in APS, as in other school systems, right, across the country, serious inequities along race and class lines for our students. And this affects achievement when we look at reading scores and the like, but it also affects a lot of other things. It affects things like who gets suspended in our schools, exclusionary discipline practices, rates of referral to law enforcement. It affects families' sense that their voices are listened to or ignored when they're advocating for what they think that their students need. So there's a range of impacts that affect all kinds of things in our school communities. And Simone's piece, I felt, summed them up concisely and very powerfully. And I think, I, as a school board member, would want to see our shortcomings acknowledged and transparently communicated. There's a temptation to tell the best story possible about our schools and to tout the prizes and awards we've won and all the great things that are happening. And there are many good things happening in our schools, but I think we're less than honest with ourselves, and we're doing an injustice to some of our students if we also are not shining a light on our shortcomings. And if we are not then tracking our progress in a really transparent way with the community to hold ourselves accountable as school board members and as APS leaders. So one of the things that I've called for in my campaign platform is I would like to see what I'm calling an equity dashboard, which essentially is a lot of data about equity that is right now located in a million different places, and you really have to hunt for it, for achievement scores on SOLs, or for students' perceptions of school culture, or civil rights data about absenteeism and rates of suspension. I'd like to see all of that pulled together and communicated in one place so that as a community, we can be following along and we can be looking and advocating and holding ourselves as a community accountable for dismantling practices and policies that disadvantage some of our students. That's been the case for far too long.
Thank you both so much. And next question, this one will begin with Mary and then Miranda. So how will you seek feedback from families that aren't able to or don't show up to office hours, aren't posting on Facebook or emailing the school board to engage? And can you give us an example of how you've done this work in the past?
Yeah, I would say that this has been a real topic of conversation and a concern for me individually, and then as a PTA leader and in the CCPTA, this has been a big topic of conversation for us about the need to take a step back and look with a critical eye at our community engagement processes. And what I see when I look at APS's community engagement processes and people's interaction with the school board is that APS and the school board oftentimes will cast a wide net at the beginning of an initiative to try to get community feedback. So we see things like surveys and town hall meetings and Facebook Live sessions and the like. And then what happens is staff takes that community feedback, and there's a lot of work that happens behind the scenes or in school board work sessions. That process continues, but for the second half of that process, where a lot of really key decisions are being made, it is only the families that have the time and the expertise to go to things like school board office hours and lobby for, their particular interest or their particular concern. At the end of those processes, what we see is that APS will present a slide in a school board meeting saying, here's everything we've done for community engagement related to this decision you're about to make. And it will list things like number of emails received on Engage and number of people who came to town hall meetings. But what needs to be asked, the first and most important question that needs to be asked is, who didn't you hear from? What are you going to do to make sure that you're hearing from those voices? And as a school board member, I would say, I can't vote on this until I know that you have made intentional and very recent efforts to reach out to people who could be impacted, and in particular, communities of color and lower income families. And we have a real sense of what they are saying about how this decision would influence them. One specific idea that I'm interested in is this notion that when we think about school board office hours, right? There's a way that we do it during the pandemic, which is on Zoom. But before then, the way that happened was, as a parent, you would go to the headquarters, the SciFex Center for APS, and you would meet with school board members there. What I'm interested in exploring is whether there's a way for the school board actually to go out into the community, to have office hours out where meeting people where they are, and perhaps having office hours in different languages, so that we make sure that we are letting people know when we do things like that we're leaning forward and we're very interested in what you have to say. We're not sitting back and waiting for you to come to us. So those are the kinds of changes that I would be interested in seeing.
Thank you. And Miranda, same question for you.
Yep. I think the big picture engagement issues from APS tend to be really big picture things, boundaries, larger issues that are school system wide. And those come up periodically, and everyone gets asked to engage, but only those who are really attuned weigh in. And there's been some improvements recently, I think, such as translation to more languages, and that's a good thing. But I think fundamentally, most families encounter APS through their school communities. And so that should be potentially more of a point of focus in terms of where we see how parents and families and students are really consistently engaging and providing feedback that may bubble up through a school community or through a PTA. I was on the Drew PTA starting when we reconstituted the PTA as a new school community. And we were really exploring different ways to try to engage the community and understand how they were experiencing their school and what was important to them. And this seems kind of passé at this point, but before the pandemic, we had piloted a virtual PTA meeting over live stream on YouTube. And that was the sort of thing that we were trying to test out in order to meet people where they are. And a lot of folks in our school community and many other school communities couldn't get over to the school at 8 o'clock at night to engage in a PTA meeting. But now we see it's actually a lot easier for folks to engage virtually. And it is important to go out and try to find families that are not coming forward. Go to them instead of waiting for them to come to you. And so I think that having a focus at the school level and the PTA level from the school board to understand, like, really what are families doing on a regular, consistent basis in terms of engagement in their smaller communities could be a more effective way to understand how folks are feeling about APS generally, and might be a pathway for more families to engage on the bigger picture issues that do affect the entire school system.
Thank you both so much for your answers. Next question, this one will begin with Miranda. So yes or no question, based on the information we have now, do you support APS moving to 4 or 5 days per week in person for the school year?
Yes, but I know I have about 2 minutes. So yes, I think that is the urging that we are seeing from the CDC and from the state and from experts nationwide, worldwide. The direction is, let's get kids back in school as soon as possible for as much time as possible. And I think what's possible, in particular in Arlington, is 4 or 5 days a week now, because we've done the things that we need to do. We prioritized our teachers and our staff for the vaccine. We are implementing universal masking. We have looked at our ventilation issues. We have a policy that lunch should be outside almost all the time, unless there are unusual circumstances. We are spacing. We are doing the things that we should be doing. And we ought to be, at this point, giving our kids the benefit of all of that planning and of all of that prioritizing of the vaccine and of the excellent way that Arlington has been utilizing all of its doses. Our kids should be seeing the benefits at this point, and that to them means more school days for the families who want it. And I can tell you that my son wants it. He's there 2 days a week right now. He loves his days in school. He loves his teacher. And he asks me all the time, when can he start seeing her every day during the school week?
Thank you. And Mary, same question to you. Do you support moving to 4 to 5 days a week with the information we have currently?
With the information that we have currently, and given the fact that we have 8 weeks left in this school year, I think that our time is better spent in intensive planning for August for a 5-day full in-person instructional option. What I would like to see happen for the remainder of this school year is for APS leadership to move heaven and earth and take every step that is necessary to get any child who has said they want to be in person for hybrid off of a waiting list and into classrooms. If you have a choice in a limited amount of space in a school building, and we know in APS that the majority of our school buildings are over capacity, if we have to make a choice between moving kids off the wait list and getting them in for 2 days a week, or taking the pool of students who have already opted for hybrid and expanding it so they have access for 4 days a week, I would raise my hand to say, let's get every child in who wants to be in for at least 2 days. And I'm saying that for equity reasons, right? I'm saying that if there are kids who are sitting it out, who need to get back in because their families now feel like it's safe, or they've identified needs that are not being met and they feel like that can happen for 2 days a week, then it's important that we honor that equity obligation and make sure that we're serving the greatest number of kids we can for at least that 2-day window. What I also would like to see APS devote more attention to, frankly, right now, than the immediate eight weeks ahead of us, I would like to see a much greater level of scrutiny on the things that are going to need to happen 4 months from now for the full 5-day model. And as I mentioned earlier, we have a budget being voted on less than a month. And I'm not sure that everything that's going to be needed for next fall is in that budget. And so I would rather have us do our homework and make sure that we are 100% confident that we're going to be completely successful for the start of a strong school year in August.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next question, Mary, you'll answer first. Other local jurisdictions have more robust public-private partnerships and advocacy coalitions. What role do you see for similar partnerships in strengthening APS?
Yeah, can I ask you just to repeat the question? I want to make sure that I understand.
So other local jurisdictions have more robust public-private partnerships and advocacy coalitions. What role do you see these partnerships playing in strengthening APS?
Yeah, so as I understand the question, when I'm thinking about public-private partnerships in public education, given my experience looking in other states and other school districts, I see that getting manifest in a couple different ways. So public-private partnerships can happen in a way that provides students with real-world outside the classroom experience through things like internships or job apprenticeship programs. One example that comes to mind is a school district on the West Coast that actually co-locates some of its community small businesses and its schools together, so that the owners of those and managers of those small businesses are actually working really intensively with students during the whole school day. So there are interesting models like that where I feel like the business community can support schools and vice versa, right? The other thing that I would call out that I think is really a practice that is happening in a lot of other places, and curiously not in Arlington, is that there are, in many communities, there are separate foundations, education foundations, that are separate nonprofit entities that work really closely with the school community and with private entities in the community to identify needs and programs that require extra funding above and beyond what a school board budget could accommodate. So all of the surrounding jurisdictions, except for Alexandria, these education foundations are in place and they're raising hundreds of thousands or even millions of dollars for schools. And so as we look at our budget problems in APS, and as we think about the kinds of opportunities and experiences we really want to provide for all of our kids, I feel like that kind of foundation partnership model is something that's really promising. So I'm interested in those kinds of public-private partnerships, but I want to make sure that fundamentally we realize that public education is a public responsibility, and that public-private partnership does not let us as a community or our local government or our state government off the hook for providing really excellent public schools for our kids.
Thank you. And Miranda, same question for you. What role do you see these public-private partnerships playing in strengthening APS?
I think one of the things going forward from this year is to look at expanding and leveraging private support opportunities in the community that are already here and are already doing great things for our kids. I'm on the mailing list for Aspire, and they did wonderful things with kids. This past year, they provided support for virtual learning. They stepped up hours last spring when the school system had a very varied approach to providing instruction. And going forward, in order to make up for lost time that has been a struggle for so many kids, individual attention and one-on-one. And there is not a lot of space for that in the budget right now, even though we have wonderful teachers and we are going to be focused on bringing our kids back in the classroom. Individual attention after school, expanded school hours. I think organizations in the community can help with that. And I think we should be looking to try to leverage that. The county also has stepped up and provided some space for additional virtual learning support, and also services for APS kids. And hopefully that can continue if there is a need for a physical location for kids to go. And on the school board, I'd be asking about what options we're looking at and following up on how we're implementing that in order to get kids going back and making up for the lost time that has happened for so many this past year.
Thank you so much. And the next question, Miranda, you will answer first. So due to the pressures of enrollment increases over the past decade, it could be said that APS has been very focused on construction at the expense of instruction. With constricted budgets likely in the next several years, what solutions do you have to meet the need for seats for students? And how will you work with the county board to proactively plan?
Okay, there's a lot there. And one thing I believe we will see is a little bit of relief from some of the enrollment pressure, just because I don't think all of the kids who have left APS this year are going to come back as fast as we may be projecting right now. So potentially we'll get a little space there, and in order to plan. In terms of managing the enrollment with the seats that we have now, there's some things that are in the works that are interesting, and it will be important to look and see how they play out. There's the Abingdon-Drew pilot program where kids can transfer from Abingdon to Drew. And I personally have talked to a couple of Abingdon parents about our experience at Drew in order to provide that input to them as they make their decision. Hopefully some families will take advantage of that, and we can learn to see if that's a way forward for individual schools that may be overcrowded. Montessori is looking at potentially bringing some of the older kids into the Patrick Henry, the Career Center site, which is another way to provide maybe some flexibility with regard to seats that is also consistent with the program that Montessori implements. So I think that those are things we can look at somewhat around the edges. And then going forward, we've got to partner with the county in order to plan, to anticipate the types of needs that we will have, to look at the available space and facilities that may be county owned or, could be cooperative space. And we are going to be preparing, I think, to build up a little bit more in order to accommodate more kids. I know that the plan is to add more secondary seats by 2024. And I hadn't heard the direct phrase about construction costs, but it's certainly something to keep an eye on. And that's absolutely a role for a school board member to be looking at things like that and making sure that we are using our construction dollars wisely.
Thank you. And Mary, same question for you. With constricted budgets likely in the next several years, what solutions do you have to meet the need for seats, and how will you work with the county to proactively plan for our schools?
Yeah, when we look at the data about enrollment, again, like I said at the beginning of the meeting, there's just been phenomenal growth in the school system over the past decade, and the end of that is not yet in sight. So we're We're projecting, according to the last capital improvement plan for APS, an additional 3,100 students coming in over the next several years. And that's going to hit at all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high. The good news on capacity and enrollment is we have some good solutions that we can tap into. One of the things that happened exactly a year ago was that APS presented the school board with 14 design studies. And those were looking at existing school sites that could either be expanded or entirely replaced to add seats. So that's one option when we look at APS owned properties. The second option is, it came in the form of a letter that the county manager sent to APS about 1.5 years ago. And in that letter, he identified 25 county owned sites that would be candidates for adding future seats for APS. There are existing county owned programs at many of those sites. And so the devil is in the details there about could those sites accommodate co-located programs that were APS and county programs, or could we find other homes for county things? And I think we have to get creative in Arlington, given that space is at a premium. We have to get creative about our school and facility design and thinking not just in terms of, you know, award-winning design. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking is about really smart mixed use design. And I presented 4 of those ideas in a column that I wrote on my website. So one is, I think, being creative about how we use our space and what kinds of facilities we're imagining. The second is we have got to get a handle on our construction costs. So we have had a number of buildings that not only have come in late or over budget, but in 2 cases in past 3 years, those facilities have lacked basic safety and accessibility accommodations for students with disabilities and their families. And that's not only a financial wrong, that's a moral wrong to those families. So when that happened, I contacted the school board to say, what are you guys going to do about this? Where's the accountability for facilities that things like this are happening? I am encouraged that there's new leadership in the facilities area of APS, and I think that should help us control the costs of our construction so that we're not seeing the hit in our operating budget in debt service and in last minute fits and retrofits in the way that we have. So that I think will help with the budget constraint piece. And I just think we will be and need to be smarter in this close collaboration with the county, looking not just at the APS sites that I mentioned, those 14 sites, but looking at that list of 25 county-owned sites and seeing what are the really creative and exciting ideas that we can come up with for co-locating programs and making the best use of our available resources here in Arlington.
Thank you so much. And I will be asking a final question before we move on to closing statements. And this one will begin with Mary and then Miranda. So do you support having SROs in school?
And I'm first, correct?
Great.
Yeah. Okay. The yes or no answer to that question is no, I do not support having SROs in schools. It is essential in all schools across the country that every student feels safe in a school building. And this was the reason, this was the rationale for putting police officers in schools initially, that was going to be a measure that would keep kids safe. What the data shows when we look across the country is that the presence of a police officer in a school does not actually decrease the incident of crime or violence in schools. So it's not serving its intended purpose. That's number one. Number two, the harmful effect, which should concern all of us, is that having SROs in schools, when we look at the downstream impact of that, we're seeing that students with disabilities and students of color are disproportionately being referred to law enforcement. And for some of those students, that's not just a bad day at school, that is a life-altering moment. And so we have to pay serious attention to the equity implications of school culture and how we keep kids safe and how we let them know they're safe. And police officers are not the solution. De-escalation techniques for all school staff to help them respond and deal effectively with conflict, and mental health services for our students in crisis, those are the things that we need to make sure we're putting in place in our schools.
Thank you. And Miranda, same question for you. Do you support having SROs in our schools?
Based on what I understand of the issue, right now, and I will be interested to see the continued work of the working group and the recommendations and how we move forward. But based on my perspective, the answer is no, at least not at the elementary level, not at the middle school level. And maybe we need to have a conversation at the higher levels about whether we really need to police our schools. But I am inclined to say no. And I say that in part because I'm a lawyer. And as a lawyer, my view of the police is that they are incredibly important. They are a part of our society and our community, but when you are in their presence, your rights are different. And that's just the way it is. And I don't think that that's an appropriate thing to bring into our school buildings on a regular basis every day. These are children, and they should be in a safe learning environment. They should be nurtured, and they should not be in the presence of law enforcement as a regular thing on a default basis.
Thank you so much. And before we move on to closing statements, I do want to give you all and anyone who's here from your team, if you guys want to put your links in the chat for folks who would like to get more information about your campaigns. And as a reminder to everyone, early voting begins next Friday, April 23rd, and election day is June 8th. And with that, I'll go ahead and kick it off to Mary for her closing statements, and then we'll end with Miranda.
Thanks, Izzy. Thank you again, everyone, for the opportunity to talk with you today about the school board race. During this gathering, I've heard you express interest and concern on issues including return to school, use of space, enrollment capacity, budget, public-private partnerships, equity, and more. Some of these, like return to school, are immediate issues that APS and the school board need to address. Others, like our budget or public-private partnerships, are longer-term things that we shouldn't lose sight of, even while we're working on our very real and immediate needs. It's important that we have elected leaders who can attend to these immediate concerns while in parallel tackling longer-term challenges and opportunities. I've been a leader of local and national organizations, and I know how to identify priorities and measure progress towards them. I believe that we can improve how APS is currently doing this and then transparently share its progress and performance with the community. I know education too, and I know that we can reinvent our schools and our system to be more sustainable, inclusive, and accountable. In my campaign, I've identified 5 long-term priorities that I believe are absolutely essential to our school system's success. First, our educators deserve more influence over school and district level policies. They deserve competitive salary and benefits and excellent professional learning that will equip them to connect with every student. Second, we have to prioritize inclusive, healthy school culture in order to promote student achievement, parent engagement, and decreased youth risk behaviors. Third, we have to go beyond stale community engagement processes with outcomes that are predetermined and ensure that all voices and perspectives are heard, not just the loudest or those with the most time and expertise to advocate. Fourth, we need to use the right data in our long-term planning, and we have to be willing to abandon practices that aren't working in order to be good stewards of public funds. And finally, fifth, we have to bring an equity mindset to everything we do and center the equity implications in every single decision we make. As a school board member, I would hold myself and APS accountable for dismantling policies and practices that just don't work anymore, that don't deliver great return on investment, and that perpetuate inequities. We can learn so much from the innovations in other school systems and states, and I am eager to bring my firsthand knowledge of this to Arlington. I invite you to learn more about my platform and the specific actions I take as a school board member by visiting my website at maryforschoolboard.org. There, you'll see that I've done my homework and I've taken the time to understand the issues facing our schools in a deep way. The Sun Gazette noted in an editorial earlier this week that my proposals are detailed, and that is by design. I want to demonstrate to voters, and in particular, those voters who have lost faith in our school system, that I'm a candidate who pays attention to the details and is ready to push for improvements. I want this community to be confident that we can get to a better place. I'm asking for your vote in the caucus next month. And also, I hope this is just the beginning of a conversation. If you have additional questions or issues you'd like to talk through, I'd be happy to have a call, take a walk, get on Zoom, or meet for coffee to hear more about your ideas and experiences in Arlington schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mary. Before we move on to Miranda, I would like to correct myself on my earlier statement. There is a primary election happening with early voting beginning next Friday, and election day being June 8th. But this is the school board caucus. So the dates for that are actually May 17th to the 23rd with online voting options available. I am dropping a link in the chat for you guys to get more information about the school board caucus. But again, voting for the school board caucus is May 17th to the 23rd. And with that, I'll give it over to you, Miranda.
Sure. Thank you all. So in closing, I've talked about return to school a lot today, but it's the issue. And there is not much else right now that's a bigger issue confronting APS than this. And for me, I've been involved in really analyzing and evaluating this issue for more than a year now. And I think that the sorts of questions that I asked the whole time and the analysis and the advocacy is something that I would have liked to see from the school board. And if I am elected to the school board, that's the sort of analysis and evaluation that I will bring as a school board member. There's been evidence since last year that showed that school could be done safely, and it showed us how. I personally advocated for mitigation, such as masking and ventilation early on. There was guidance saying that we should prioritize our youngest learners. And now what we have is kids wanting more school days, and I think we should be making sure that happens for them. These are all things that the school board can ask questions about and can follow up on. We should be asking how families are doing right now, if they're still succeeding. If they're switching out of virtual, why wasn't it working for them, and what can we learn from that? If they're switching out of hybrid, why is that? What can we address now, and what do we need to know for the fall? Right now, there are 8 weeks left in the school year, and Secretary of Education Cardona said that every day matters. Let's grab those days for our kids. Moving forward, a lot of us live in Arlington for any number of reasons, but schools is a really big one. We're proud of our school system, and a great public school system is a direct and incredibly important way to further progressive values. We need a strong school system in order to get our kids off to a good start, all Arlington kids. And a strong school system is led by a strong school board that asks questions, challenges assumptions, asks about alternatives, and makes sure the right path is chosen. I have experience with this because a lawyer is actually about bringing a set of skills to all manner of subject matter areas. We evaluate information, we synthesize it, we present it clearly, and we try to persuade others that this is the way forward. And that's the sort of skill set and experience that I would bring as a school board member, and I hope to have your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you both so much for being here with us today. They both have links in the chat for everyone to check out their websites if you'd like to get more information about them, their campaigns, would like to help out. As a reminder, voting will take place between Monday, May 17th and Sunday, May 23rd, with online voting options available. And I've also dropped the link in the chat for arlingtondemocrats.org/vote/SB caucus for those who need more information on the election and how to vote. But again, thank you both so much for being here, and thank you everyone else for joining. Hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good weekend.
Good job, Izzy.
Yay.